Happy Good Friday. It's April the 19th, 2018. This is 508, a show about Worcester. I am Mike Benedetti. This is Brendan Melican.
How's it going, Mike?
Hi, Brendan. Brendan, as usual, the world conspires to make the discourse stupid and trashy and pessimistic, but I am having none of it.
Thank you for that.
The man wants us to talk about stupid stuff in stupid ways. The man wants us to feel like we're basically powerful. The man wants us to feel like the closest thing we can come to asserting power is to humiliate our enemies.
Yeah.
But I'm not buying it.
Not into that.
Linda Barry, the great cartoonist, once wrote, "Freak the man freely, do the Macarini," and I say freak the man freely. That's what we're doing on today's show.
Sounds good, Mike. It's a plan.
But we're going to start off with something which may end up becoming a negative, stupid topic. But we'll try our best not to. I promise I did not wait until Good Friday to cover this. The big news on the Diocese of Worcester is that Auxiliary Bishop George Rueger died 2 weeks ago. Every Catholic I've talked to since has had nothing but good things to say about him.
Yeah, likewise, on a personal level, I have nothing but good things to say about Bishop Rueger.
In 2002, he was accused of sexual abuse, and I'll read the summary from bishopaccountability.org. Bishop George Rueger, accused in 2002 lawsuit of 1960s sexual abuse of boy aged 13 to 14, denied allegation, not charged. Alleged victim withdrew suit in 2003. Retired age 75 in 2005, Worcester, Massachusetts Auxiliary Bishop Emeritus. The man who accused him and then withdrew the accusation died in 2006. So on the one hand, you have 60 years of service as a priest. On the other hand, you have a very messy accusation that was put forward and then withdrawn, and then the guy died. And I don't know. Sometimes when you have somebody who's been abusive and they die, that's what triggers sort of a wave of victims coming forward with their stories. Mm-hmm. And since it's been 2 weeks since Bishop Rueger died and we haven't seen that wave, I feel more confident than I would have been 2 weeks ago that, that something like that's not going to happen, that this isn't one of those kinds of issues. I don't know. Like I said, messy topic, always a messy topic. Alleged allegations of whatever.
I'm going to keep my mouth shut on this one because I feel like things go off the rails anytime we start going down this road.
Yeah, I mean, again, like
I don't,
like that. I mean, this is the thing, right? Is that like at least at this point, like I can say, I feel like I can talk about the accusation and then the 60 years of whatever just fade away into the background.
Well, so this is this is what I will say. Like when we have talked about this in the past, right? I get pretty amped up whenever we're talking about sexual abuse in the church, but I've always tried to qualify that by making sure it doesn't sound like I've just got like an axe to grind with the church. And like Bishop Rueger is one of those individuals who I would have considered a friend, right? Or would consider a friend. I don't know, how do you refer to somebody after they've passed away? Was a friend.
You were
right?
on friendly terms with.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, and there's not a ton of priests in the city of Worcester who I could say that. But they're there, and Bishop Rueger was one of them. I mean, he was, after he had retired, right? I mean, he still made sure that he had a seat on the altar when my father passed away at his funeral and whatnot. Like, he was a pretty close family friend. I don't mean to take anything away from the person who had made an accusation at one point in time against him. Obviously, tragic that person has also passed, so that story seems to be a moot point. But yeah, I guess that's if there's anything that I have to throw into that ring, it's just to be clear that it's when we're talking about this, it's not an axe to grind sort of thing. Some of these folks are actually really good friends.
Definitely not. I mean, honestly, from my point, I feel like it's like trying to be scrupulous about things, that feeling like I'm part of an organization that has done its best for decades to not talk about this stuff, to maybe err in the other direction, at least for a few years. So I'll mention too that Bishop Rueger was involved in the effort to move known abusive priest Thomas Texar from Worcester to Texas. Involved in that, he's mentioned in some lawsuit against that guy, that priest, as having written a letter.
Right.
Many letters were written around this priest. So this is also the kind of thing where anybody who was involved in administration of the Catholic Church in the 70s and the 80s, good chance that they were knee-deep in some kind of mess like this. So again, which is not to say that is a good thing or justifiable, but I think it's maybe just to say that it's not necessarily a sign of personal failure, that plenty of good people participated in what ended up being a bad situation.
Absolutely.
There we go, Brendan. We got through that one without a train wreck. I was not a train wreck, not at all. Speaking of trains, Brendan, Cyrus Moulton at the Telegram and Gazette have just done what we have only dreamed of.
What is that?
Which is that he has talked with Holden man Dennis Lipka.
I did see this story. He actually got him on a bus, too.
The new WRTA
This guy's riding a bus all around Worcester. So Holden guy riding a bus around the city of Worcester.
Yeah, and he has a list. He has a list of what Mr. Lipka wants to do. He said the main priority is to increase ridership, which makes sense. I'm not sure what the plan is, other than moving some schedules and routes around a little bit. He says there is no silver bullet, which of course brings him close to my heart. I love saying there's no silver bullet. He also wants to try running 16 passenger vans instead of full buses along some routes, which makes sense. There's been many a time where I have ridden miles on a bus where I was the only person on the bus in Worcester, so that doesn't seem like a good idea overall. He wants to work with social service agencies on dealing with vagrants at the transit hub, and he plans to be replaced by a new long-term WRTA head within the next 18 months. So if we're going to talk to Holden Man Dennis Lipka, we might want to do it soon.
Maybe we could interview him on a bus. It wouldn't be our first bus show, Mike.
We haven't done a show about the bus in a while.
Or on a bus in a while.
Yeah, that's right. The Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission is doing their quadrennial update of the Mobility 2040 Regional Long-Range Transportation Plan. And I've been looking at the last update that they did back in 2016, and I would say that it's just a bunch of stuff about like we should build some roads and fix some roads and nothing shocking. But I do appreciate knowing that somebody is trying to think about the region as a region.
Related, but only slightly. I know we've talked in the past. I think it was last fall we were talking a bit about, actually it was last summer, about Lyft. And how they are somehow like making their way into the public transportation sphere. And Massachusetts is one of those areas. At least they seem to be involved on some level. I noticed over the last couple of weeks, maybe month or so, Lyft is rolling out passes that you can buy from them. So like you can you're basically prepaying discounted rates for transit, which...
Is this a deal where you pay a monthly fee and you get a 10% discount? Or this is different?
I think this is a slightly different one. I think it's 10 rides.
This is different than I'm thinking. Okay,
but it's basically shaving the price off of whatever. It is a discount in some form, but it's a package sort of deal. It just struck me as interesting, not because it's related directly to mass transit, but the savings and the way it was bundled seemed to be very similar to like a Charlie card or one of the passes that you would buy in advance. I guess you'd buy the same thing here in the WRTA. But yeah, similar model. It almost seems like their pricing structure, they're trying to aggressively move towards a model that is very similar to what people already use for public transportation. I wouldn't be shocked to see that those two things somehow intersect in the near future.
It'll be interesting to see. We do sometimes talk on here about how the WRTA has a weird cost structure in that they lose something like $5 every time you ride the bus. It's interesting just noting that Lyft and I think Uber both are currently running in the red about $1 billion a year. Now they're in an aggressive growth place and blah, 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 blah. But to me that does maybe add a little bit of a sober note to our dreams that Lyft will one day replace the bus or some chunk of the bus is in that the WRTA has trouble with funding. Lyft very intentionally has trouble with funding. Is that necessarily a sustainable long-term alternative?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I just had to use Lyft yesterday.
Yes.
I had a interesting experience. Mike, did you know, you're not much of a driver, so maybe you don't know this.
I'm a heavy Lyft user.
You're a heavy Lyft user. So on Wednesday, I had an interesting experience where I was driving my Jeep down Grove Street, making a right-hand turn onto Lancaster Street over by the old Northworks building.
Sure.
And when I started making that right-hand turn, my left front wheel decided to make a left-hand turn.
Whoa!
I just no longer wanted to be attached to the Jeep, which was a really neat thing. I've never had that happen before. Thankfully, I was no longer on the highway.
Wait, did the wheel fall off the Jeep?
Yeah, and just went bouncing down the road. It was actually a really great experience because I didn't die. That was great. When the wheel came off and started bouncing down Grove Street, there was an old guy on the side of the road who was just going, "Whoa!" every time the wheel bounced. So that was awesome. Like, it was very
appreciative
cartoonish.
Audience.
And then from there on, there was like a dozen or so people who either stopped to see if I needed help, which was great. There was one guy who very slowly drove by and politely yelled out, "Excuse me, sir, but I think you're missing a wheel." He was kind of a jerk, but it was funny, so I gave him a thumbs up.
You deserve that.
And
you were missing a wheel.
I was totally missing a wheel. There was an old woman who came by and, in the deepest Worcester accent imaginable, said, "Hey, at least it ain't raining." So that was fantastic. I did work on my tan a little bit. But point being, so I didn't have a car for 2 days and had to rely upon Lyft. One, it's gotten more expensive.
Okay.
And, so I was using it midday. The first question after seeing what the price was, first question I asked both drivers, "Been busy today?" "Oh, you're the first one." Seems like it's gotten pricier, even when you compare it against public transportation. The number is kind of absurd, right?
Okay.
Like, the only reason I didn't use public transportation is because buses are like once an hour now, and I had places to be. It was too long to walk.
It works great if the schedule works with your schedule. And if your schedule doesn't work with your schedule, you're doomed.
You're doomed. Yeah. So, anyways, that was my Lyft story. It's got a little bit pricier. I have no idea as well how that business model is going to work. And folks, if you're driving your own vehicle, check your lug nuts.
Brendan, we got some environmentalism news this week. This is a report from NPR called "Our Plastic Bag Bans Garbage." I was just asking you if plastic bags were garbage. This is "Our Plastic Bag Bans Garbage." This is something we've talked about doing in the city of Worcester. I think the city of Shrewsbury has already done this.
We're doing it statewide now.
Oh, we're doing it statewide.
Well, the state is moving because you've got these disparate local ordinances and whatnot.
Yes.
Enough of them have moved forward where on the state level it seems like it's going to be easier to have it happen there. There was something happening in the last couple of weeks regarding just that.
Well, I will remind listeners before I get into this that Scott Schaefer Duffy and I are the great pioneers of reusable shopping bags in the city of Worcester. I will put my track record up against any of 10 other people in the city of Worcester, so that just know, people, that no matter how much you hate plastic bags, I hate them a lot more than you. That said, this NPR article and the reports that it refers to kind of make me think that plastic bag bans are garbage. Everybody who NPR talked to thought plastic bag bans were garbage. We have a paper here from Rebecca Taylor on the effect of disposable carry-out bag regulations on unregulated bags. She's looking at the California 2016 bag ban. This is another one of these things where there's a lot of moving pieces, so it's interesting to see what actually happens. The 2016 bag ban led to 40 million pounds less of plastic carry-out bags being used. But then people bought 12 million more pounds of trash bags, so that's 28 million pounds less plastic being used.
Yeah.
But then there's 80 million more of paper bags being used. I have tons written down here. I think it's pounds.
Yeah.
80 million more pounds of paper bags are then used, and in some ways, paper
80
bags
million
are
more paper bags. Yeah.
Yes, in some ways they're worse than the plastic bags.
Sure.
I don't think it's 80 million more bags. I think it's 80 million more pounds of bags.
Oh.
Anyway, so it's like very questionable. Yeah, it seems like a real toss-up. She thinks that the way to go is fees.
Fees.
Is to say the bag is going to cost you a certain number of cents, and that gives you an incentive to not use them, but it still gives you the option to use them.
Yeah.
Especially because, again, like a lot of people reuse them as a trash bag or whatever. If you're one of those guys, you might, or whatever, it's just inconvenient. You're like, okay, I won't take a paper bag, which is probably more destructive. And sure, I'll pay a couple of cents for this because whatever, I'm going to use it as a trash bag. I'm okay to pay that inconvenience fee now. But it's enough to incent you to say, you know what, I should probably have a real bag.
That's the part that I can never really figure out, right? Because I agree completely about the fee side of things, only because it seems like shopping habits, at least if we're talking supermarkets, right?
Yes.
Like, we'll stick there for a second. I think most people tend to be pretty structured in the way they go shopping, right? Like, it's not like an impulse buy at a run to the supermarket, right? Like, at least maybe I'm thinking about it from a family perspective. That
There's usually a plan.
Exactly. So, like in our case, like all the reusable shopping bags live in the trunk of the car, right? And there's a couple extras at home, but for the most part, they're just there. It's so you don't have to think about it. That's where the reusable bags are there, and you don't.
You're right.
But if you are just making an impulse buy, yeah, that's like where you would think that having some sort of fee attached to it would make sense on some level, whether it be a fee to cover the costs of
fishing plastic bags out of the river or something.
Yeah, it's Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we should probably do the same thing with straws too, right? Because I mean, I love ducks, but sometimes you just want a straw with your drink, and we don't need to ban them. We'll just have a straw fee.
The NPR also cites this 2011 report from the UK Environmental Agency, this is a government agency in the United Kingdom, they're looking at 2006 statistics on different kinds of carrier bags in the UK. And they're measuring the global warming impacts specifically from the different kinds of bags. Huh. And based on their data, reusable bags look pretty good. So here's like a little chart here where this stuff at the top. This is basically how many times you have to use a different kind of a reusable bag or another kind of bag in order to mitigate the global warming damage caused by this plastic bag. So, for example, if you're carrying a paper bag is 3 times as global warming impactful as the plastic bag. The normal sort of carrier bags that you get from the store, the kind that you pay $1 for or whatever, actually are only 4 times as damaging, I believe, as a super flimsy disposable bag. So you use that bag 4 times, and then from then on out, you're just like, I'm saving the planet every time I use my bag that I bought for $1. Your cotton bag is 130 times as impactful on the earth as that plastic bag. So you got to be going to the grocery store a lot of times with your tote bag in order to be like, I'm glad I used cotton rather than flimsy plastic.
Can I make probably an unpopular statement too?
Do it.
I hate tote bags.
Okay.
I was just saying this to somebody the other day. I feel like anytime there's a photograph, and it usually involves people who I care deeply about, like a photograph of a bunch of activists in a room, I feel like everybody, in front of every activist, there's always a tote bag. There's nothing that angers me more irrationally, totally irrational, I get that, than those tote bags are the most, you carry them every once in a while, they're so impractical. It's like when I see an older woman carrying a purse on their forearm, it's like your arms are not designed to hold a purse like this, but it's like that's how, people, it's not a normal backpack, briefcase, shoulder bag.
Sure. I mean,
fanny packs are making a comeback. We got all sorts of bags. Tote bags, it's not the right move. It's a terrible look.
I'll tell you my tote bag strategy as somebody who's a big pedestrian who always shops on foot. Like, I have a giant tote bag, collapsible tote bag that I'll stick in my backpack. So when I go to the store, if I'm buying a lot of stuff, backpack is the first place I'm going to put the stuff. And the second place is I'm going to balloon this thing out. So now I have many gallons more.
Yep.
In part because it had backpack straps and all that nonsense, it would be larger and would be less convenient to carry. But also in part because I've already got the backpack on.
Yeah.
So you can carry a backpack and a shoulder bag together, and that works okay. 2 backpacks is kind of a mess. Yeah. So that's why those are the times that I use that tote bag. I've gotten a lot of use out of that tote bag. I'm encouraged to see that even a fairly high impact non-cotton tote bag is still only like a dozen or 2 dozen times more impactful than a flimsy bag.
Ones I feel like I see everywhere.
Oh, the cotton ones. Well, the cotton ones are a nightmare, and we can especially look at this Danish Environmental Protection Agency report from 2018, which looks at a bunch of different bags and a bunch of environmental indicators.
We lost nearly all of our viewers.
Nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants to hear it.
It's the truth, folks. Your tote bags, they're terrible.
I'm just saying the truth here, which is that if you reuse, they assume that you're reusing your disposable bag as a trash bag. So you're sort of cutting the impact of that bag in half by this report. If this is true, then an organic cotton tote bag has, by their study, 149 times more climate change impact. So within a year or two of using that cotton tote bag, it will now have been a good investment climate change wise to have bought that cotton tote bag. But if you add up the full list of impacts, things like terrestrial acidification and abiotic resource depletion, the cotton bag has 20,000 times the impact as the plastic bag. This is hilarious.
Here's another question I have for you then. And I don't expect you to have the answer to this. It's certainly not going to be that report. But are we actually approaching the point now where making a shop local argument is actually the most harmful thing we can be doing for the environment?
Oh, so you mean versus getting stuff shipped to you by Amazon or whatever?
Does it not? I mean, and I'm only bringing this up like I own a local business, right? I get it. I'm not actually making this argument truthfully, I guess, but in some capacity, if we're at the point where retail is taking retail as we know it, the mass market retailers, brick and mortars, are having a terrible decade. It only seems to be getting worse, and more purchases are being made online via shippers like Amazon and whatnot. If all that shipping is taking place anyways, doesn't that become the less impactful approach environmentally than, say, on a local level, having all of these goods shipped to your neighborhood where we don't even know if someone's actually going to be picking them up, right? Like,
well, although Amazon Prime is probably air mailing me paper clips or whatever I'm ordering from them, that's pretty impactful. I mean,
but there's no plastic bag involved.
There's those plastic inflatable things. See, this is the thing is that
right.
there is a point in this discussion where you have to say, well, now we've learned something about plastic bags, but ultimately, when I go to the grocery store, the amount of plastic in that plastic bag is probably in the minority of the amount of plastic that is coming into my life. Like the amount of plastic packaging on stuff. Am I worrying about how much plastic is on the chicken I'm buying or the tofu I'm buying or whatever?
Yeah, right.
I'm not really not sweating that. And there's potentially more plastic one way or the other in those kinds of things.
Yep.
And in fact, in my life overall, is taking one more trip to the Bahamas, how does that compare to using a cotton bag versus a plastic bag? Yeah. And the answer is that it's millions of times more impactful than any of that kind of nonsense.
This, I guess, and I'm obviously being facetious when talking about, just buying everything online, the more environmental approach. But like, I think it lends itself, what you're describing lends itself to a much bigger and very necessary conversation that is not at all. So yeah, I mean, we're really having a consumerism conversation, right? And the need to change things, right? So it's very similar to what we've been talking about for the last month or so, or a few months with recycling, right? Like, which is that the solution to what should the bag be made of is there should be no bag because you should not be buying that much stuff. And I, as a lifelong consumer, right? I understand the hypocrisy here, but that is the conversation that needs to be taking place. If we're talking about recycling, the right way to recycle is kind of irrelevant if all it means is you're bundling up your garbage and sending it to a developing nation so that they can sort through it by hand and then dump the majority of it in the ocean, right? And since the 70s, that's what people have been doing when they talk about recycling. Regardless of the impact you thought you made, regardless of how good it made you feel, all of your garbage is now floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You did nothing with it. And we're kind of talking about the same thing here when it comes to bags, right? Straws, whatever. It might make us feel good for a brief moment in time to not see those plastic bags stuck in the tree, or the straws, I don't know, a duck wearing a hat made out of drinking straws. Yeah. But the reality is the impact is negligible when you layer it against the reality that we just have too much crap, too much stuff. There's too much stuff, Mike. I love stuff. So I mean, I'm not claiming to have a solution on that front, but some of this, maybe that's, I guess, where NPR in their sort of snarky headline is spot on. The ban kind of is garbage because the impact it's going to make, it's a little dent.
And again, I speak as someone who's spent hundreds of hours of my life working on this, and I still think that this is these are all interesting because they are such miniaturized versions of the bigger questions that it kind of feels like if you could crack the drinking straw issue or you could crack the plastic bag issue, if you could find the silver bullet, then maybe you could apply those lessons to the larger and more impactful things. Mm-hmm. But that there's a... the nice thing is we at least don't need to worry about it, really. We can learn from it. Our curiosity we can bring to it, but we don't need to worry about it because it is irrelevant in the amount of devastation that we're causing. That's what is what we need to worry about.
Speaking of which,
here's an interesting short blog post from the blog Qualia Computing, which is a blog which says it is about revealing the computational properties of consciousness. And I appreciated this. This felt like it resonated with certain things we've talked about. This article is called Investing Time and Resources in Happiness. I like it because it goes back to first principles, or it looks at edge cases, or it just tries to reframe certain problems in life and then answer them, and then I think it's very thought-provoking to do so. So as a function of time and resources, what is the optional way to reduce suffering and maximize happiness? You have 1 minute and no money. Try to calm down and distract yourself with music. You have 1 hour and $1. Ignore the dollar, just make a playlist of songs you really enjoyed in your life and play it as you dance. You have 1 day and $50. Go get yourself some hard drugs. You have 3 months and $1,000. Get some gym equipment, establish a workout routine, hang out with friends as much as possible, get laid, go to see the movies, go to a beach. So I could stop there in case you have any comments on these first four ideas.
Like perfectly reasonable uses of time.
I mean, again, and this is talking about this is making an argument. This is the optimal way to reduce suffering and maximize happiness. This is your own and others. So in the case of the one day and $50, go get yourself some hard drugs. May just be like use $50 worth of hard drugs. Possibly you're sharing some of those with your friends too, to help with their happiness. You have 3 years and $30,000, or 3 years and $3,000. Learn about Buddhist meditation, get fit, and then focus on achieving the jhana states. Stay in them for as long as you can. I assume they're talking about these are certain states of focused consciousness, and from Buddhism. You have 10 years and $10,000. Investigate charities that minimize suffering or make your own. Fundraise in order to eliminate suffering in people who have cluster headaches by giving them access to tryptamine vape pens. Help the spread of painkillers for people dying in hospitals in third world countries, etc. You have 50 years and $10 million. You found a research institute devoted to identifying the biochemical, functional, or behavioral causes of suffering, identify promising large effect-size genetic modification technologies in order to enable sustainable hedonic tone enhancement. You build a company that sells permanent hedonic tone amplification. With the money, you get rid of factory farming and implement a wild animal welfare system. Then you get rid of game theoretical impasses using Ultra Bliss technology. The end.
There it is. That's the solution. Nowhere on there was dosing the entire world population with LSD.
This is, I mean, I think the one comment on here is like you didn't mention anything about microdosing mushrooms or anything like this as far as increasing happiness. These are certainly people who are quite aware of this idea, so I'm sure that they left that out intentionally, or maybe just to make things more straightforward.
Yeah,
like maybe there's some combination of hard drugs and going to the beach. That's actually the best way to spend 3 months and $1,000.
Nobody just throws hard drugs out there, right? Like, so I mean, there's probably the assumption that you're making that if you got a spare $50 and you're going to go all in on some hard drugs, that like that's not probably not going to be your first experience with drugs, right? Like, so you probably have something else going on in the background on the softer side of things.
I don't know. I've been thinking about this a lot. I know a lot of people who are, people who are leading a hard life or who have led a hard life and continue to lead a hard life. And many of them use hard drugs. Many of them listen to music also. Yeah. And I was just thinking, I think about this frequently.
Sometimes together.
Yeah, I think about this frequently. Like, if I was in their situation, would I also be doing what they're doing today?
Yeah.
Like, if somebody said to me, write a choose your own adventure and decide what should this person be doing to minimize their happiness, blah, 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 maximize their happiness, I should say, I think I would be saying, well, you should be getting your whatever figured out. You should be getting your Social Security card figured out and applying for this kind of a benefit and also going to learn about something at some job training thing and blah, 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 my whole Puritan spiel that I would be giving them. But, if your time horizon is a day, if your big thing is like, I feel like my brain is falling apart, I feel like my whole life and my heart is falling apart, I want to keep it together for the next 24 hours. What do I do? The answer is probably beg on the street corner until you get $50 and then get wasted.
And I see no problem with that whatsoever. Actually, I support that fully. Because, I mean, I do the same thing, right? I mean, like, in my perfectly comfortable reality, if there's a day that goes... Today has been an absolutely insane day for me, right? Like, if... From me, in my perspective on the universe, like we're only at noon, we're approaching 2. It's been completely batshit, right? Like it's crazy. By the end of the day, it's going to just get to the point where it's like, if it continues this way, like, you know what? I'm going to worry about most of this tomorrow. Right now, I'm going to go to a bar, grab a shot of Jameson, and then call it a day. That's it. And I don't see anything wrong with that.
I mean, I think the thing that I see wrong with it is that ideally your time horizon should be more than a day, so that if you were like, my whole life has fallen apart, well,
my whole life has not fallen apart.
And that's the difference. And so, like, I talk to people who, in their more sober moments or their more wasted moments, talk about how they really would like to get sober, how they were happier when they were sober, blah, blah, blah. And like, that's part of the problem, I think, is whenever you're like, this does feel like the most reasonable thing I can do to get through today. But boy, I wish I had an extra 10%. That I could start spending an extra 10% of my energy doing something like learning about Buddhist meditation, I guess, or going to the gym, or trying to get my benefits package figured out, or trying to get a job, or trying to get my health figured out a little bit.
I'm only suggesting that those low bar, low dollar value entry items there, they seem totally, even in my completely privileged, not much to complain about, relatively speaking, life, those seem completely reasonable. I wish too that I had the time to put aside a couple of years and go whole hog on transcendental meditation or maybe unlock the secrets of the universe. I don't right now, but yeah, I can totally get behind, tying one on real quick when you've had enough. And I've got things pretty good. I don't have a lot to complain about.
Yeah. I mean, So
we're going to go do some Jameson shots after this, Mike?
Well, Brendan, I want to read a little bit of something else, just because I was thinking about the top of the show about how, talking about how trying to resist what the man wants us to do, which is to hate on each other in unproductive ways. If we're hating on each other in productive ways, you could criticize that, but you could also see how that's useful. But
sure.
Man, I feel like most of the time when we're hating on each other, it's not productive. It's not productive at anything. It's just the pettiest satisfaction in the world, and you might as well be spending $50 and doing some hard drugs. Mm-hmm. It's not going to make you any happier tomorrow to be doing that kind of stuff today. The man wants you to do it. But
are you insinuating, because I would agree if you are, that we are living in a pretty bizarre timeline, right? In some ways.
We always have been.
Yeah. It seems like there is a lot more, I think, headbutting, if you will, like in society today. Like it's weird. Like on the one hand, you can look at all the numbers and the stats that say there's never been a better time to be alive, and almost like any conceivable metric that
I think it's true. I think it's true that
politically, socially, it seems like everything is.
Yeah, we continue to evolve a society which is farther and farther from whatever we're evolutionarily and traditionally know how to deal with, and it keeps moving faster and faster, and we keep getting completely confused for long periods of time about what to do to make ourselves happier. I think something I read this week that actually was interesting to me was also talking about how especially younger people who are more used to an internet world, finding that the public and private spheres, their expectations for them maybe are different than people from an older generation, at least for some of those people. So that like at your house, there's certain things that you can say and not say, and there's a certain level of comfortability and coziness that you expect. Yeah. And that if you're on, I don't know, Facebook, middle of the street, like maybe there should be a different expectation, but not everybody has that. Some of the people are like, come on, we wouldn't say this at home with the kids. Why are we saying this, The one
thing that we're missing is people who disagree actually having conversations with each other.
I don't know if that's helpful, but I think that I feel like you know what? I feel like having conversations is fine. I feel like this is a thing where it's up to each individual, unlike the bag thing, to look at the other people and say, no more. I'm drawing a line in the sand. No more. This is what the Didache says. It has a great subtitle, The Lord's Teaching Through the 12 Apostles to the Nations. Here's the beginning of chapter 1. It's short. It's called The Two Ways in the First Commandment. This is great because it's like an instruction manual in a way that the Bible never really gets to, except for maybe the 10 Commandments. Brendan, there are two ways, one of life and one of death. But what a great difference between the two ways. The way of life, then, is this. First, you shall love God who made you. Second, love your neighbor as yourself, and do not do to another what you would not want done to you. And of these sayings, the teaching is this. Bless those who curse you, and pray for your enemies, and fast for those who persecute you. But what reward is there for loving those who love you? Do not the Gentiles do the same? But love those who hate you, and you shall not have an enemy. Abstain from fleshly and worldly lusts. If someone strikes your right cheek, turn him the other also, and you shall be perfect. If someone impresses you for 1 mile, go with him in 2. It goes on and on, just sort of pulling out some of the hardest sayings in the New Testament and being like, that's the first thing that you should do, Brendan, is the hard parts of the New Testament. Yeah. Then we can talk about the way of death in the next chapter. I just love this man.
So we kind of agree then, right? I mean, if that's the point, right? Like communicating with those you would disagree with.
I don't even know. It doesn't say anything about dialogue, respectful dialogue. It just says, don't get into it, man.
Well, I don't know in today's day and age, but it's saying you got to love those that.
Honestly, for me to have a conversation with someone is not always the most loving thing.
No, I know.
Leaving them alone is usually.
But like nonverbal expressions of admiration, I don't think those would fit very well in today's society. Can't just go up to strangers and start hugging them.
Heart emoji.
Heart emojis.
Heart emojis.
Yeah.
Nonverbal expression of love.
There you go.
Happy Good Friday, everybody. Hi, Gabby. Thanks for doing the show this week. We'll talk to you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.